Welcome to Instruction Discussion, our weekly look at the latest topics and trends in education affecting schools here on Long Island and schools around the world. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or student, listen for tips and strategies to help you navigate the educational landscape. There's a bell. It's time to start today's Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to Instruction Discussion, where each week we will examine a recent trend or development in education and its impact on Long Island. We know the number, 42. We know the team, the Brooklyn Dodgers. We even know the year of Branch Rickey's Noble Experiment, 1947. And of course, we know all of the on-field accomplishments of one Jackie Robinson. What we may not know is how hard he fought off the diamond for the causes of the day. What we may not know is how he inspired and motivated people with his mind as much as his athletic ability. Martin Luther King called him a sit-inner before sit-ins, a freedom rider before the freedom rides. Baseball great Hank Aaron called him a leader of the Black Power movement before there was a Black Power movement. And his beloved wife, Rachel Robinson, simply called him Jack. Today, we welcome author Michael G. Long, who, along with Uhuru Williams, penned the book Call Him Jack, the story of Jackie Robinson, Black freedom fighter, a brilliant biography that focuses on who Jack Robinson was off the field as well as on it. Mr. Long, welcome to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
Kevin, great to be with you. That was a super introduction, by the way. I'm very grateful for that.
No, thank you for actually writing this book. And matter of fact, let's go ahead and get right into it, because we know that there are plenty of biographies out there about Jackie Robinson. So what made you decide to write this one?
A couple reasons. The primary reason is our tendency in the United States to freeze our heroes at a particular point in their lives. And so when we look at Martin Luther King Jr., for example, we often freeze him at the March on Washington, where he delivers his brilliant "I Have a Dream" speech. We freeze Rosa Parks on December 5th, 1955, when she refuses to surrender her seat on a bus in Montgomery. We freeze Malcolm X as well at a certain moment in his life when he calls for Black Americans to form rifle clubs. We've done the same thing to Jack Roosevelt Robinson. We've frozen him on April 15th, 1947, the day when he cracked the color barrier in Major League Baseball. And we've frozen him there, I think, Kevin, because he's so safe, so unthreatening to white America at that point. He's turning the other cheek. He's peaceful. He's polite. He's smiling. And while everybody is hurling racist epithets at him, he's just continuing on nonviolently. What we want to do in this book is to expand our understanding of Jack Robinson so that we see him not only on April 15th, 1947, but at the beginning of his life and also at the latter points of his life when he's a fierce Black freedom fighter.
Now, we know that baseball was not even Jack Robinson's best sport, right? And that there were actually other Negro League baseball players who were probably better than he was, and many of whom who thought that they were going to be the first. So why was it that Jack Robinson was chosen to be the first?
Yeah, this is the question, isn't it, in baseball history? You know, there's some question over whether Jack was really the best player in Negro League Baseball. His stats were really stellar when he came out of the Negro Leagues. So I don't want to downplay that at all. But I will say that Rickey had other considerations when he looked at Jack compared to other players. You know, he was interested in Jack for several reasons. You know, Jack was college educated. He had a lot of experience playing on interracial teams. He was a veteran from the military. He was a solid American citizen, and he had the type of moral character that Rickey was attracted to. Rickey knew that Robinson was the type of person who would fight back. But he also knew that Robinson was strong enough to turn the other cheek in 1947 for the sake of integrating baseball. So, Ricky was also attracted to Robinson's Methodism, quite frankly. He was glad that Robinson had a background as a Methodist and was committed to the social principles of Christianity and their concern for racial justice. Lots of factors came into play.
So let's talk about some of those factors that we talk that make up who Jack Robinson was. And one of those was his involvement because we mentioned he was a veteran. So let's talk about his military career for a moment, because at one point he was actually up almost being to be court-martialed, but it was overturned. So what were the circumstances behind that, and why is that so important to his legacy?
So Robinson was known as a fighter in the U.S. Army as well. He was known as somebody who would not take racial injustice sitting down, so to speak. And while he was serving in the military, he was traveling on a bus from a hospital where he was getting treatment for bone spurs in his ankle. And when he boarded the bus, he saw a light-skinned African-American woman he knew well. Her husband was also an officer in the military, and he sat down next to her, and they began to chat. The white bus driver saw Robinson sitting next to this light-skinned woman. He mistook her for a white woman, and he barked at Robinson to move to the back of the bus. Robinson refused to do so. The bus driver eventually stopped the bus, got a couple of MPs, and reboarded the bus. And they hauled Robinson off to an MP center, where an MP proceeded to call Jack the N-word. And Jack eventually said that he was going to break that MP in two if he didn't stop calling Robinson the N-word. Robinson gets hauled up before a military tribunal. He's court-martialed, and he's charged with insubordination and other charges. He eventually beats those, but that incident gives us beautiful insight into who Robinson was. He was a fighter, and after his time in the military, he went to the Negro Leagues, as you know, played for the Kansas City Monarchs, and there a teammate said that he had a temper like a rattlesnake. Robinson did. This was who he was in his core. He was not naturally nonviolent. He was not naturally peaceful. Anytime he experienced racial injustice, he straightened his backbone and fought hard.
And I think is that type of mentality, that type of, fortitude that really is what we need to remember about Jack Robinson, that he was just that type of person willing to stand up for whatever cause that he believed in. So and I know some of our listeners are probably wondering, well, why do you keep calling him Jack Robinson? Isn't his name Jackie? Don't we know him as Jackie? Well, that is true. But why is it that, because I think even in college, up until college, he was known as Jack, but something happened there that kind of got the moniker Jackie to stick. What happened when he was in playing sports in college?
Yeah, it's a really complicated story. His mother named him Jack Roosevelt Robinson, and she clearly meant to call him Jack. Jack's brother was Mac. He had another brother named Frank. So these were monosyllabic names, right? And she meant to call him Jack, and Jack embraced his name growing up. He referred to himself as Jack. When he was in high school, he signed his yearbook as Jack. When he was at Pasadena Junior College, he signed the yearbook there as Jack. And he often called himself Jack throughout college. Now, when he was in college, and even a little before then, some of the white sports writers started to call him Jackie. Now, there was a little bit of heat to that, right? So Jackie was almost an infantilized version of Jack. There was heat to it in the sense that it sounded like Jack was their boy, right? Jackie. It was an infantilized name. And that name really stuck with him. Though after college, he continued to refer to himself as Jack. Up until 1945, Kevin, he was signing baseballs as Jack Robinson. actually up until 1946, excuse me. He's still signing baseballs as Jack Robinson. In 1947, when he breaks into the Dodgers, the white sports writers refer to him as Jackie. Black sports writers start to refer to him as Jackie as well. And that name sticks with him the rest of his life. The rest of his life, the only ones who really called him Jack were Rachel, his now widow, who's 100 years old, by the way, and their best friends.
So it just goes to show that even through the athletic prowess that he established, that he was demonstrating on and off the field, the hint of racism still abounded. And that's what we tended to hold on to even all these years later.
Yeah, by calling him Jack, we're really trying to shift the focus as well to Robinson's life beyond the baseball diamond. So when we think of Jackie, we think of Jackie on the baseball diamond, right? And we can hear players saying, Jackie, come on, Jackie, let's go, Jackie. Well, when we call him Jack, we're shifting the focus from that playing field to his vibrant life beyond the diamond, which he considered to be far more important than all of his exploits on the baseball diamond. So that's another reason why we call him Jack.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because I know like you said, the persona, on the one hand, you have the persona of Jackie, who was the athlete, the Hall of Fame baseball player. But on the other hand, you have, on the flip side of that coin, you have Jack, who was the staunch advocate and activist. So let's talk a little bit about what was his role during the civil rights movement of the late 50s and early 60s.
Yeah, so in 1956, the NAACP awards Robinson the Spingarn Medal, and this is the annual award for works of national importance. And Robinson in 1956, he's still playing for the Dodgers, says it's the most important part of his life. He's never experienced anything quite like this. And I think he takes that Spingarn Medal as inspiration for launching himself into the civil rights movement. Now, up until then, he had focused primarily on his baseball career and compiling Hall of Fame statistics. And that was good enough, no doubt about it. The NAACP recognized that as a major contribution to the civil rights movement. And they were right about that. But after that medal is awarded, Robinson becomes a leader in the NAACP. In 1957, he travels around the country, raising money and increasing the membership of the NAACP. And in 1956, of course, is when the Montgomery bus boycott kicks off, and Robinson pays attention to that. He admires Dr. King, and he arranges for a meeting with Dr. King. And Dr. King latches onto Robinson as well, and he invites Robinson to take part in this budding, emerging civil rights movement. And Robinson is all too happy to do that. So in 1962, for example, he travels to the Albany movement that King is leading in Georgia, and Robinson goes to these 3 churches that were burned down because they were trying to register Black voters, and Robinson commits right then and there to raising money to rebuild these Black churches. In 1963, Robinson visits the Birmingham campaign, and he visits the children who were part of this children's crusade, who were facing snarling dogs and supercharged hoses and being swept off their feet. And Robinson goes to visit with them, and he cheers them on. 1963, he also attends the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, and not too many people know this, but Robinson was a preliminary speaker at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. He marches proudly with his son David by his side. And these are just a couple examples, Kevin, of Robinson's deep interest and involvement in the civil rights movement. His widow, Rachel, calls him an informal leader of the civil rights movement. I think that's a bit modest. He was a full-fledged leader of the movement.
You are listening to Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and our guest today is author Michael G. Long, who, along with Uhuru Williams, penned the book Call Him Jack, the story of Jackie Robinson, Black freedom fighter. We talked about, you spoke about how Jackie Robinson, or Jack Robinson, was a a staunch leader during the civil rights movement. It's probably one of the more important figures, right up there alongside of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and all of those. When he ended his playing career, which was about 10 years, so after the 10-year career was over, what were some of the other causes that Jack involved himself with? Because I know, and to give an analogy, when Arthur Ashe was done playing tennis, he went back to increase the number of black and other minority players in the sport. So what did Jack Robinson do for the sport of baseball within the inner city communities?
Oh, wow. That's a fascinating question. There's not a great answer to that question either. Robinson mostly used his platform to criticize Major League Baseball. He criticized Major League Baseball for a couple of reasons. One, he believed that it was a problem that Major League Baseball didn't have any black managers or coaches when he left Major League Baseball. He was right about that. Frank Robinson was angling to become the first manager, but he hadn't had any success up to that point. So on the one hand, he criticizes Major League Baseball for not having black managers and coaches and black faces on the administrative side of baseball. He also, at the same time, criticizes black players for not becoming more involved in the civil rights movement. In fact, he criticizes Frank Robinson for devoting his attention to becoming a black coach rather than becoming active in the civil rights movement. So Robinson is really hard on black players for not becoming interested and involved in the civil rights movement. And he points as well his finger at Willie Mays. Willie Mays was a frequent target of Robinson's ire. So he confronts Major League Baseball on a couple different levels.
And I think one of his quotes is very telling when you just mentioned it. I was thinking of one of his quotes that says, "Life is not a spectator sport. If you're going to spend your whole life in the grandstand just watching what goes on, in my opinion, you're wasting your life." So that kind of tells everyone that, Jack wanted people to become involved. If you see something wrong, then you need to be part of the solutions rather than continuing to be part of the problem. And no matter who it was. And of course, we saw that there were the issues within the black community. So he attacked the people within the black community. He said, you all need to get more involved and get active as opposed to sitting back and waiting for somebody else to quote unquote save you. And I think that was the type of person that he really was. And he wanted that aspect of himself to be known all around, no matter which community you were going into.
Kevin, one of the interesting things about Robinson, when I look at his entire life, is his sense that he became more assertive. This is his word, more assertive after he left Major League Baseball. Now, think about this. Robinson stole home plate 19 times. That was pretty assertive. But he thought he became more assertive because he had a better cause, and the cause was first-class citizenship for Black Americans. And really from 56 to 1972, he devotes his life to that cause. And he joins causes left and right in that period. But yeah, it's pretty dramatic when you think about Robinson believing that he became much more assertive. He also believed that his life after baseball was far more important than anything he accomplished on the diamond.
And I think it's because, as far as the assertiveness goes, I think it's the perception of that assertiveness. And probably because during his playing career, he knew that there was a particular role that he had to play. And he had to stay in his lane, so to speak. Once he retired, the gloves came off. All bets were off now. He could be himself. And you saw that in the activism that he took part in.
Yeah, I'd just like to go back to 1947 for a second. In 1947, when he's cracking that color barrier, the Dodgers are squaring off against the Philadelphia Phillies, and Ben Chapman is the manager of the Phillies, and he's in the dugout, and he's roped a couple other Phillies to join him at the front of the dugout, and they're yelling racist words at Robinson, and Robinson is not taking it well, and he thinks to himself, and this is almost an exact quote, I really wanted to throw my bat down, march over to the dugout, and use my despised black fist to smash the teeth of those white sons of you-know-whats. So this is who Robinson is inside. He's got this burning passion to fight for justice for himself and for what he calls his people. And he begins to do that a couple years after 1947, but you're right. After baseball, he really comes into his own. And you know what? He becomes unpopular as he does that. The more he speaks out, the less popular he is.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because I would like to know, and like our listeners to know, what does that legacy, what does that aspect of him say to this new generation of people who are just discovering who Jack Robinson is, or actually discovering who Jackie Robinson is, especially through movies like 42, played so wonderfully by the late Chadwick Boseman. What does his legacy now say to this new generation of people who are just discovering the man behind the legend?
Yes, well, I hope the younger generation will sit up and pay attention to Robinson, because he's right there with him. His legacy remains unfulfilled. His dream of first-class citizenship remains unfulfilled. And on a particular point, Robinson was a big proponent of fighting police brutality. This is a really important point. Robinson faced police brutality when he was growing up in Pasadena. The members of the police department there in Pasadena were former members of the Ku Klux Klan, believe it or not. And a couple of times they turned their guns on Robinson, and he knew what it felt like to face police brutality. Even after he retired from baseball, when he was this star that virtually everybody knew, he still faced police brutality. So one afternoon, he's walking into the Apollo in Harlem, and a police officer stops him and asks him what his business is. And Robinson says, "What the hell business is it of yours to ask me what my business is?" And the police officer gets into a scuffle with Robinson, and he actually pulls his gun on Robinson. The only thing that really stops it is when a crowd gathers around and they yell at the officer and they say, "Hey, that's Jackie Robinson." And the officer eventually backs off. And Robinson writes a column about this. And he says that, "I wonder what would happen had my name not been Jackie Robinson." And you and I can think of all the names of innocent Black men who've died at the hands of white racist police officers. Shortly after that, Robinson sides with the Black Panthers when they become victims of white police officers who storm a courthouse in New York City and assault Black Panthers at this point, sending many of them to the hospital. Robinson sides with the Black Panthers, and he defends their efforts to defend themselves by force when police officers don't protect them. I hope the younger generation sees that Jack Robinson was a fierce fighter for Black lives. Black lives mattered to Jack Robinson.
I think that's a very important point, just to show that the issues that we are fighting against today were the same issues 30 years ago, same issues 60 years ago, that it seems to almost be this never-ending cycle that just doesn't end. So, and that's the whole reason why Jack Robinson was such a staunch proponent of other athletes using their platforms to be activists. And I don't think he could really understand why it wasn't being done as much as it should have been. Some of his contemporaries, of course, Muhammad Ali, and we know what his exploits were, and Bill Russell, and we know what he was able to do, and so forth. But there were a whole slew of other black athletes that did not take part. And I think that's where Jack Robinson, I think he probably fought just as much against his own people in that regard as he did against the injustices that were taking place.
Yes, and Robinson was one of the few who could throw barbs at black athletes at that point. And he did really well. And, Kevin, I'm just thinking of some of the super celebrity athletes now who devote their lives to earning the bucks. And I think Robinson would be terribly disappointed at that, especially if they did that to the exclusion of fighting for civil rights. So people who focus, for example, on selling underwear brands, I'm thinking of Michael Jordan, if you don't mind my saying that name, would be very disappointing to Jack Robinson. Though, for the record, let's note that Jordan has really stepped up in recent years and has fought for civil rights, at least with his words. But yeah, the case of Muhammad Ali is really interesting too, because Ali and Robinson were not closely aligned. Robinson was a huge fan of boxing, and he loved watching Ali box, but he really disliked Ali for refusing to serve in the Vietnam War. Nevertheless, he backed Ali for exactly doing that because he believed that Ali was doing it on principle. And Robinson always favored people who fought on principle. And though he didn't agree with Ali's principles, and he certainly did not, Robinson was in many ways a blue-blooded patriot who favored the Vietnam War and the fight against communism. He still supported Ali's right to free speech.
So we know that just from hearing you talk a lot about Jack Robinson, we see that he was a very complicated man. And we tend to focus on, as you say, we tend to just spotlight him on his baseball career and everything he was able to do on the baseball diamond. But he was so much more than that. And I thank you for writing this book and really allowing us to focus on that other aspect of him. So if you did have to leave our audience with just one final thought about what they should take away about who the man Jack Robinson was, what would that thought be?
Oh, I want to point everybody to 1972, and this is shortly before Jack dies. And this is when Republicans are slashing welfare, and there's an outbreak at Atticus Prison, and there's a white backlash to the civil rights movement. And Robinson writes in his autobiography, "I can no longer stand or sing the national anthem. I cannot salute the flag because I know I'm a black man in a white world." And I think it'd be good for all of us to reflect on that, the legacy of those words and what they mean for us today.
And I think you're absolutely right. And for him to say those on, not necessarily on his deathbed, but as some of his last public words, that's telling. That's telling about who we are as a country, as well as who he was as a man and as a black man at that. Well, we would certainly like to thank our guest today, Michael G. Long, co-author along with Yahuru Williams of the book Call Him Jack, the story of Jackie Robinson, Black freedom fighter, for coming on to our show today.
Thank you, Kevin. It's been a great pleasure.
Once again, my name is Kevin Boston Hill, and thank you all for listening to Instruction Discussion right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.